Will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time, and I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. So in preparing for this hearing today, I actually looked back at the work this committee did on staff diversity in the 116th Congress, and I was struck by a few things. Our work began with a member meeting devoted to first talking about diversity more broadly, and then as it applied to Congress. And we talked, and more importantly, listened to each other in an effort to find common ground and figure out how the committee should structure a hearing on the topic. And through that discussion and through many sense, it's clear that our experiences as individuals and as members of larger groups and communities profoundly shape how we process daily life and experience daily life. Our experiences shape how we see ourselves in relation to others and how we react to and with the world around us. And recognizing that and respecting that fundamental reality, I think, builds empathy. Last year, just as we began a series of virtual discussions on staff capacity and diversity, the nation was seeing in communities all over this country demonstrations over the murder of George Floyd. And the work we were doing felt inconsequential compared to what was happening right outside our doors. But it was, and I think continues to be, a lesson in how our own histories and experiences shape the way we understand and react to the events in our lives. That same lesson applies to the events that unfolded at the Capitol on the 6th of January. Members and staff are still processing what they experienced that day and will continue to do so for some time to come. But to assume that everyone who works in the Capitol reacted to January 6th the same way would be to ignore the lived experiences of every person who was here that day. For more than a year now, we've been living through a global pandemic, something very few of us have ever experienced, and we're now beginning the slow process of returning to normal. But for so many of our fellow Americans, normal now looks very different. Thousands of people have lost loved ones and have suffered tremendous financial loss. The pandemic has been a shared experience, but with vastly different outcomes. And for that reason, recovering from the pandemic will mean radically different things to different people based on what they've gone through. So all of this is to say that this committee began its work on diversity with the understanding that our lived experiences affect the way we see and interact with the world around us. And this past year has thrown a number of intense experiences our way, and we've all processed them in accordance with what we know. So our job as representatives is to give voice to the people we serve. And that responsibility is bestowed upon us from the moment we're sworn into office. The beauty and the challenge of upholding that responsibility lies in the fact that we speak for so many. Our constituents are diverse in their backgrounds and their experiences and views, and it's our job to listen. It's also the job of our staff to listen, and they're often the first people our constituents encounter when they reach out to the federal government for help. Staff also help members make sense of complicated policy questions, and given the diversity of people and policies that staff encounter daily, the experiences and histories they bring to the job matter a lot. Our constituents are better served by staff who reflect the diversity in our own districts and in our own country. And members are better served by staff who bring a diversity of perspectives to the policymaking process. We do our jobs better when we're willing to acknowledge that we don't know and everything, and when we're willing to listen and learn from people whose experiences are different from our own. Building a more diverse congressional staff is a process. And today we're joined by a panel of experts who are going to help us understand why investing in this process is so important. I'm looking forward to hearing about the work they've done and their recommendations for how Congress can recruit and retain a workforce that looks like America. And with that, I'd now like to invite Vice Chair Timmons to share some opening remarks as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today for this important hearing. Since the establishment of this committee, we have made staff retention and diversity a top priority. When we talk about modernizing Congress, we don't just mean updating the technology in the House, but investing in and developing a talented and diverse workforce that accurately reflects the communities we represent. In the 116th Congress, we made a recommendation to make permanent the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and I am pleased that this recommendation came to fruition and is now a permanent office. However, other than the creation of a human resources hub, which we recommended and envisioned in part as a way to help diversity recruitment, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion was really the only recommendation made last Congress that dealt directly with diversity in Congress. There's a lot of diversity just on this committee and the constituencies we represent. Just as our constituents have unique backgrounds and different experiences, those who come to work on the Hill are no different. In both this Congress and last Congress, we have heard from many witnesses on ways Congress can improve its hiring practices and promote diversity and inclusion broadly, whether it be for people of color, disadvantaged communities, people with disabilities, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and varied geographic locations. I am looking forward to hearing from our expert witnesses today on ways we can continue to recruit and retain a diverse and talented workforce that better reflects the diversity of the American people. Again, thank you for your leadership, Mr. Chairman. This is a top priority for this Congress, and we need to get it right. So I just appreciate you working so hard on this. And with that, I will yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And today we are joined by 4 witnesses. Witnesses are reminded that your oral testimony will be limited to 5 minutes, and without objection, your written statements will be made part of the record. Our first witness is Kemba Hendrix. Ms. Hendrix serves as the Director of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, where she works to cultivate an inclusive environment in the House with a workforce that reflects the diversity of the country they serve. Prior to her appointment as the inaugural director of the House ODI, Ms. Hendrix served as the director of the House Democratic Diversity Initiative, where she focused on increasing House Democratic workforce diversity and expanding opportunities for diverse candidates at all House staff levels. She has also worked within several organizations prior to joining the ODI, including the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the U.S. Department of State as a legal advisor to the Chief Diversity Officer and Office of Civil Rights, and the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Ms. Hendrix, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony. Oops, sorry, we still have you on mute. Sorry.
Thank you.
Now we got it.
Good morning, Chairman Kilmer, Ranking Member Timmons, and the members of the Select Committee. My name is Kemba Hendrix, and I am the Director of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on our shared perspective of diversity, recruitment, retention of the House workforce. It is my honor and privilege to speak on behalf of my team, and with their support, ODI's dynamic, diverse, bipartisan team is one that I feel privileged to work alongside every day. Over the past year, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion has worked tirelessly to serve the House. That was the possibility because bipartisan House leadership and this committee were committed to and believed in the power of diversity and teamwork. In our inaugural year, we have executed a comprehensive staffing plan, delivered an operations plan and a diversity plan to House leadership, developed strategies for engaging with House employment offices, colleges, universities, and other stakeholders. Furthermore, the office has completed a novel barrier analysis of the House workforce. Some of the outcomes of this data collection are shared in the information we submitted for the record. We've engaged with over 1,000 job seekers, and many exceptional qualified and diverse individual job seekers have become our colleagues. Of the many accomplishments that we have worked together collaboratively to exceed, and all of this that our staff has done, some of this is what points to is the benefits of recruiting, maintaining, and supporting a diverse staff. Something that we all view is a critical goal. While I intend to discuss our analysis and the recommendations today, I would also like to briefly discuss how COVID-19 has impacted our staff and our findings. While our staff has continued to work, members of my team, like many others of the staff community, have lost family members and friends, acted as caregivers to our families, managed virtual school for children, experienced medical incidents that required either extensive testing or hospitalization. One of my staffers is studying for the bar while working full-time. All of this on top of a global pandemic, historic civil unrest, and the January 6th attack on our place of employment. What we experienced as a team is not unique, but it does represent a microcosm of what has happened here at the House. The events of the last year have tested many communities, including the community of the House. Communities that are disproportionately impacted are exactly those communities that are home to many of the diverse staffers on the Hill, including but not limited to Black, Indigenous, Asian, Hispanic, LGBTQIA, and people with disabilities. We, and I say we because as a diverse House staff, we are the people living this experience. Our staffers who utilize the Office of Diversity and Inclusion as a resource frequently recommend programming and services they would like to see from us. Recently, those recommendations have included many things, but what I will speak to are recommendations that have included OD&I House-led staff support groups, executive coaching for senior staff, a core curriculum that would include cultural competence for senior staffers, facilitated discussions on race, bias, experiencing microaggressions in the workplace, professional communication, team building, and many other things. And why we'd like to provide all of those services and more to the House community. We know that other resource offices may be more appropriate, and the recommendations we submitted sometimes do reflect that. Furthermore, ODNI's diversity, equity, inclusion barrier analysis offers insights and support relevant data about what staffers believe are substantive hurdles for diverse staffers. The resulted reporting identifies what staffers believe from various demographic groups, and they seem to believe that they are often overlooked in consideration for House leadership roles and promotion. Many employees feel that the only way they can get promotion is either to leave their current office or to leave the Hill entirely, which makes creating a pipeline of diverse staffers, a sustainable pipeline for leaders of color and those from non-traditional backgrounds, very difficult. Our barrier analysis has provided anecdotal insights into their beliefs and feelings of the participants who about the unique hurdles that they face, many which were exacerbated by the events of January 6th. Additionally, what staffers communicated seems to be a lack of awareness about available resources, and compounding that issues for staffers who are aware of existing resources is that some expressed a feeling that those resources may not meet their unique needs. It should be noted that these are observations that may not actually be the views of all House staffers. After stating these challenges, I want to circle back to what I stated at the beginning of my testimony and speak about my exceptional and resilient staff. I believe our staff remains resilient because of our diversity and our concerted efforts at inclusion and belonging within our staff. I'm grateful for this opportunity to connect with the Select Committee and testified on our shared and important work on modernizing and strengthening the House community, your thoughtful and sustained attention to these critical issues and making a meaningful and positive difference. And they're making a better House community, and specifically a better American community. I thank you for your leadership and the opportunity to contribute to your work.
Thank you, Ms. Hendrix. Thank you for your testimony and for your leadership of the ODI. Our second witness is Keenan Austin Reed, Vice President of the Alpine Group and a veteran of Capitol Hill. She served as Chief of Staff to Congressman Donald McKeechin and led his work as the whip of the Congressional Black Caucus. In 2018, Ms. Austin Reed co-founded the Black Women's Congressional Alliance, a membership organization of more than 300 bipartisan and bicameral Black women Hill staffers. She's led dozens of professional development briefings, events, and webinars to inform staffers about new career opportunities, provided a platform to elevate their profiles to the broader Capitol Hill community, and pushed growth and diverse hiring in the United States House and Senate. Previously, she served as Chief of Staff to DC Council Member David Grosso and as Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor to Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. Ms. Austin Reed, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Kilmer and Vice Chair Timmons, members of the committee, staff, and interns. I'm grateful for this committee for creating a space to advocate for staff, and it is a pleasure to be with you. As the chair stated, I'm Keenan Austin Reed. I serve as Vice President at Alpine. I recently ended my decade-long career as a Hill staffer this past January, and previously I served as Chief to Donald McKeechin, Deputy Chief to Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. I'm also a wife to a current Chief of Staff, which beyond my affinity to see Congress as an institution continue to evolve, keeps me closely tied to its success. In 2018, I co-founded and currently chair the Black Women's Congressional Alliance, an organization representing over 300 Black women staffers with a goal to increase the number of Black women serving in senior staff positions in Congress and providing them professional and personal support, particularly as they seek more senior roles. Retaining staff goes beyond what staff are paid. It's about the community and experience. And we choose this work as more than a job, it's a calling. Improving the dynamics of the workplace and hiring significantly boosts job satisfaction and fulfillment. While there are many longstanding and underlying issues in empowering and supporting diverse staff, the current climate is particularly challenging. For all that love this institution, January 6th was and very much still is unnerving. Staff of color who felt especially targeted by hate symbols displayed by the mob continue to feel angry, unsafe, and unprotected. And despite this emotional toll, these staffers continue to serve, allowing the work of the Congress to go largely uninterrupted. Pay disparities, underrepresentation at the highest levels, structural inequality, and cultural bias leave staff of color feeling disenfranchised. The insurrection only compounded this. I commend the leaders of staff-led organizations who have supported their peers during this time and challenged us all to improve. It is with this in mind that I make the following recommendations. First, professionalize hiring to attract a wider and more diverse talent pool. I strongly encourage the Congress to invest in the expansion of our House Diversity Office to include recruitment staff. Currently, hiring managers are tapping into their networks of a select few people of color to produce a diverse talent pool. It's a strong start, and it demonstrates intent beyond hiring the traditional network of candidates. But the burden of hiring people of color should not exclusively rest on people of color to produce candidates from their networks. I, along with many others, have volunteered and supplied resumes and recommended candidates. But this work is hindered by those who do it often have other full-time jobs, and our reach does not go far or wide enough. Next, we must provide cultural competency for these offices. For offices that are making their very first diverse hire, or those that have hired diverse candidates in more junior roles, but never see those staffers transition to the leadership of the office, we need to provide greater support for the competency of that office. It is not enough to hire a diverse candidate. We must make sure that the environment is ready to integrate them into the work of the office. We should also recognize that an environment that has had a homogeneous staff for the majority of its history will need to make some cultural adjustments. Lastly, establish a diversity, equity, and inclusion point person in each office and give a compensation adjustment to support that work. The success of DEI principles demands that the ideology be accepted fully in how the office does that work. It must have member level engagement and buy-in and be continuously prioritized. I commend the work of Senator Tammy Duckworth, who's already doing this. I recommend that staffer become the internal support for that office and the member in chief for those issues, which could include leading or initiating culturally sensitive conversations, ensuring diverse networks are engaged in the hiring of interns and staff, supporting staff by identifying professional growth and mentorship opportunities, and expanding stakeholder engagement to support legislative goals. This staffer should receive a pay increase for doing this work. It is critical that we recognize that diversity in congressional offices is a prerequisite to fulfilling the tenets of our democracy. Thank you for your consideration of my testimony, and I welcome questions and follow-up by the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Austin Reed, and you stuck the landing of 5 minutes. Well done. Our next witness is Greg Orton. Mr. Orton is the National Director of the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, where he leads the coalition in developing policy and communication strategy and advancing a joint agenda to address the needs of the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. Prior to joining the council, Mr. Orton spent 9 years working on Capitol Hill for Representative Al Green. He has served as a dedicated advocate for the AAPI community, as well as a mentor for many AAPI staffers in Congress. Mr. Orton, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Kilmer, Vice Chair Timmons, members of the Select Committee. As was mentioned, my name is Greg Orton, and while I currently serve as the National Director of the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, which is the leading coalition of 37 of the most prominent Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander civil rights organizations in the country, I'm here today to share my personal views as it relates to the current state of staff diversity in Congress. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be back amongst friends and certainly back amongst at least the virtual halls of Congress. Before I begin, I'd like to note that my very presence here today is an example of what is possible when a congressional office is meaningfully and authentically committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I simply wouldn't be here to share my experiences, but for Congressman Al Green. And his former chief of staff, Jackie Ellis. She in her own right was a trailblazer for diversity. And for them to both take a chance on a then young Korean American adoptee, give them the chance to make mistakes, learn, and eventually build a skill set that served not only the constituents of the 9th Congressional District, but now the national AAPI community, that's a remarkable and humbling thing. My written testimony contains a number of similar recommendations based on my observations as it relates to pay and staffing structure, but I really want to focus my remarks today on the experiences of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander staffers that I've had the privilege and opportunity to interact with. To start with, many of the staffers that I still talk to today began their careers when I was still on the Hill. And so it's with great pride that I've watched many of them put in the time to put themselves in a position to be eligible, at least on paper, with the number of years of experience for coveted senior roles. But in reality, many of them that I talk to now express a sense of real frustration and are approaching burnout or have reached it already. And so, coupled with the fact that we know that misperceptions about our community persist, my belief is that there remains a real need for unconscious bias training amongst all congressional offices and hiring managers. Harmful stereotypes about monolithic community success, or the fact that maybe Asian Americans are too quiet and timid to be successful in leading a congressional team, are harmful and they're incorrect. And it's long past time that Congress try to address those things. As it relates to staff organizations, I'll simply say that I think Congress should fund them. They create vital environments for staffers to thrive. I know that I wouldn't have made it for as long as I did without the support of colleagues and friends, and also a place to build meaningful friendships. Simply because community spaces clearly will create themselves on the Hill doesn't mean that institutionally Congress shouldn't support them. I personally believe that Congress is a remarkable place to work. And the truth is that Asian American staffers on a day-to-day basis face racial microaggressions that can make the experience quite isolating and frustrating. Some of these elicit amusement, others elicit much more painful responses. One example would be it's sort of a rite of passage, I think, for all staffers of color to eventually be mistaken for one another or a member of Congress. I'll be honest, today I'd be flattered to be mistaken for some of the Asian American chiefs that are still on the Hill. And I'm, glad to consider them friends, are also proud to see that they've, climbed the ranks. The truth is, though, that there's one personal experience that I'll always carry. And this goes back to 2010 when there were protesters on the Hill concerned about the Affordable Care Act. For those members who were present then, they'll remember that the halls were flooded with protesters. And I'll remember riding an elevator in Longworth, standing next to a few of those protesters and regarding one and receiving a look of a mixture of disdain and disbelief and being told that they couldn't believe that they let foreigners work in Congress. Fast forward to today and January 6th, I can only imagine how Asian American Pacific Islander staffers must feel after navigating a year of the COVID-19 pandemic. As staff were taught to take verbal punishment and slights with grace in service of constituents, but the anti-Asian rhetoric that has been politicized, it's got to carry weight for many of them. And if not for themselves, then for fear for their parents, their grandparents, their elders, and many of those who become targets for this violence. In conclusion, I'll say I truly believe that staffers of color are resilient as they are brilliant. To choose to work in a place surrounded by everyday reminders that you don't belong, and to then turn those reminders into motivation to work harder, is precisely why Congress should be spending more resources and time in promoting greater diversity. So many of us have watched our families struggle to navigate government, watch government harm us or ignore us completely. And it's far past time that we address some of those inequities. It is a privilege to work in Congress, but it shouldn't be exclusive to those who are already privileged. And I hope that the Select Committee will continue this important work and encourage their colleagues to lean in as well, because I think this is one solution that's really going to require the entirety of the institution to get right. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Mr. Orton. And our final witness is Maria Meier. Ms. Meier is a former senior leadership staffer and served as director of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, as well as the Senate Democratic Diversity Initiative. In 2017, she founded her own practice where she helps clients build inclusive environments. Her newest venture, We Are the People, is a community of support and training for underrepresented voices in public service. Over the past decade, Ms. Meier has counseled over 1,500 individuals nationally and abroad on career and personal development, and has spoken to hundreds of others on issues related to diversity, U.S. politics, and public service. Ms. Meier, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Kilmer, Vice Chair Timmons, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to participate in today's hearing, along with this panel of esteemed leaders who, as I am, are committed to promoting diversity and building inclusion in Congress and throughout the public sector. And I do want to associate myself with all the comments previously given. I thought they were brilliant, and I appreciate their willingness to share their experiences. The perspectives I offer today come from having spent a dozen years working in both the House and Senate, in positions ranging from answering phones to serving as a senior staffer in leadership offices. But it was during my last job on the Hill, where I led the Senate Democratic Diversity Initiative, that I had the opportunity to look at how to connect the multitude of dots that are necessary to create a truly diverse, inclusive, and well-trained talent force on the Hill. Drawing from my experiences, I recently launched a social enterprise called We Are the People. We work to strengthen our democracy by supporting those who are within our institutions, shaping and impacting policy. We do this through developing relevant empowerment training for staff, creating sustainable inclusion plans for the organization, and promoting careers in public service, particularly for diverse professionals. There's a saying that institutions are only as strong as the people who run them, and Congress is no exception. The makeup of current and future workforces is not an ancillary issue, but integral to how well you, the members, are able to do your jobs. Last year, I co-authored a guide for Congress and their hiring managers on how to have a more diverse staff. We sought to offer actionable and relevant advice that spoke to the very unique work environment that is the Hill. As a first step, our guide encouraged managers to be intentional with regards to developing a diversity plan by having a clear understanding as to what the office even means by diversity. I recognize that there is a lot of discussion about this issue and about the various types that diversity can exist, be it gender, age, military service, or socioeconomic background, among many other points of identity. And I wholeheartedly support any office's deliberate and intentional outreach to job candidates that reflect underrepresented voices and perspectives. However, I do want to be clear and stress that these efforts cannot cloud the issues that the largest racial and ethnic groups in this country are still underrepresented at the staff level in Congress, particularly in senior level positions. This lack of representation, in turn, has real implications on how Congress develops meaningful legislation and policies. Looking at the recommendations that your committee has put forward, I believe that there are some areas in particular that can be expanded to help ensure that staff and members have the tools necessary to successfully create a diverse and inclusive work environment. Change begins at the top, and for this reason, I support your proposal for a new member orientation to be more comprehensive and nonpartisan. And to this, I recommend that the training also address human resources issues. You, the members, are in reality chief executive officers within your office. While you're not likely to manage staff day to day, you are the ones who set the tone and the culture for your staff who serve you. Additionally, I would recommend that this training need to include instructions on how offices can address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not as a partisan issue, but as an approach that helps members understand the role of diversity in creating better policy. Secondly, the committee recommends boosting congressional capacity by providing more comprehensive training options for staff, including creating certifications and formal onboarding processes. Here too, I support this recommendation and propose the creation of a certification program for all chiefs of staff, staff directors, and anyone who manages staff. This program can be completed over the course of a Congress and include a set of core competencies that will benefit all functions of the office. I believe also that learning how to write a diversity plan and how to manage diverse staff is a critical skill set for all managers and should be part of this instruction. Finally, expanding training budgets and training opportunities is critical, not just to recruitment, but to staff retention. A recent survey in the tech sector found that 94% of employees would stay in their current role longer if they felt that the organization invested in their professional development. I believe if we surveyed staff on the Hill, the numbers would be equally high. Providing professional development opportunities is not an investment in the individual employee alone. It's an investment in the level of service that you are delivering to your constituents. Again, thank you for this opportunity to voice my support for your committee's efforts to look for ways Congress can expand the capacity of its staff as a means of developing the future diverse and inclusive workforce that serve the American people. And I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Meier, and thanks to all of our witnesses for your terrific testimony. We'll now give our committee members an opportunity to ask those questions, and I'll start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Let me start, Ms. Hendrix, with you. We currently rely a lot on outside groups to do our diversity analysis, and even your recent reporting is just a snapshot in time. Give me your sense, would it be feasible to collect and track more data on the diversity of our staffers as we onboard them? Is that something that would be helpful? Give us some guidance there.
Yes, I do believe it is feasible to collect that data at onboarding. Use as an example, the federal government uses a standard form at the point of onboarding to collect some of that information at that point. In that way, we could, the information that we do is as a survey could be collected and completed and updated at regular intervals rather than doing it as a snapshot at one point in time during the year. It could be updated regularly. For example, we plan to do a compensation study that will be a snapshot of a point in time at one point in the year. I believe we will collect that information in July of this year rather than collecting it at that one point of that workforce in that singular month and that year. We could update it throughout that year because we plan to move, rather than doing a static report, we plan to move to a digital manipulation of that team. We could update, if we do that, we could do it over time and collect it and update that regularly rather than doing it as a one snapshot of the time. It could be updated regularly.
Appreciate that. Ms. Meier, you talked about the importance of leadership at the top, and I appreciated that. I want to get your sense of how members who are often not involved in their office's day-to-day operations can do better, can encourage and help ensure that their teams are enacting their values in the office when it comes to diversity. And specifically, if you have guidance for us as to recommendations this committee could make to try to enhance that, I'm very open to your suggestions.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I do believe it's important, and it's absolutely understandable that members have schedules that they don't need one more thing to do, but that they do recognize their role in setting the tone and the culture of the office. And it's important for the chiefs of staff to know that they're in sync with their members as well. That's why I recommend integrating diversity/human resources training, not just for new members, but also every time you have your retreats at the caucus level, periodic speakers when you have your weekly caucus meetings. Again, it's introducing the concept of how you identify this, and they can provide very specific, easy, actionable things to do, like sitting down with the chief of staff and writing a simple statement as to what your office values are, your mission statement that includes how you reach out to the diverse constituencies that you represent. Again, this is not to add extra to-dos and tasks, but it's to include you and implement, and so chiefs of staff and all the staff can manifest your values as to what you want to see and how you want to serve your constituents.
I think that's really helpful. I think it's important for us not to look at this as extra work. This is the work, right? Having an environment where people want to work and where we have a diverse workforce, that is the work. So let me ask Mr. Orton, do you feel that the AAPI community is sometimes overlooked in the diversity discussion? And if so, what do you think about a recommendation that congressionally funded reports actually include data disaggregation with regards to the AAPI community?
I appreciate the question, and I think it's spot on. Not just within the context of staff diversity, but more broadly speaking in the public sector. We found that many times Asian American Pacific Islanders are just not a part of people's calculus when they're talking about communities of color. And that is something that's been a bit baffling. I think it's driven by, again, misperceptions about sort of this widespread belief that Asian Americans are successful and, don't require the same kind of consideration as other communities of color. And I think that that's a mistake, because the Asian American Pacific Islander community is widely diverse, has a huge range of different lived experiences, different immigration experiences, and that has to be captured if we're really going to lean into this diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation.
Thank you. Let me recognize Vice Chair Timmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all the witnesses for taking their time. This is very important, and we just appreciate all of your input. I want to start with objective. So in my mind, our objective should be that every member's office, well, let's start with Congress. Congress should be representative of the country. And then within Congress, every member's office should be representative of the people they represent. So it should be diverse based off of race, gender, geography, socioeconomic background, lifestyle. And it should be proportional based off of the population they represent. Can we start there? I want to open that up to comment. Do we have any, is that accurate? Are we on the same page there? Is that the objective? Anyone?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I do think it's a strong objective to have a workforce that looks like America. I wouldn't limit it to exact proportionality. It's not currently, and I think we've got so far to go before we set that as a standard. I think we need to develop, as the chairman said, it's not side work, it's the work, and we've got to inject diversity into the DNA of our offices. I think if we start to look at if a state's population is a majority white and Black staff cannot, or staff of color can't work in that office because we're focused on the proportionality, I think that limits the work product of the office. I think your goals of diversifying the Congress and the staff of Congress are spot on. I would just approach it a bit differently.
But would we benchmark success as making it representative? I mean, is the definition, is our success, my whole thing is it should be proportional. So if there's a decision, if there's a decision about, well, not a decision, an office should go ahead.
As a minimal benchmark, that would be great. But if that were our minimal benchmark and that were success, we're not there yet based on the data that we've collected for the House. If we wanted to set that as a baseline benchmark and to say that we could reach that and that be a success as a benchmark, based on the data that we've collected from the 2019 compensation and diversity study that we did for the House. And I want to state that as a caveat that we only collected information for about 50% of our workforce. And that was a survey, and it wasn't done with having 100% of our workforce represented. And so I state that with that as a caveat. Having said that, though, with those caveats included, if we use that as a representative workforce and data scientists state having a 50% representation does give you a good sampling size. We're not there.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. We're definitely not there. And that's why we're having this hearing, and that's what our goal is. I just want to make sure that we begin with the objectives. So next, internships. We've talked a lot about internships as onboarding access to the Hill. Can we all agree that that is a place that we should focus in addition to recruitment for staff? But should we put an oversized effort onto internships as a way to give additional access?
I would think that what we're seeing now is that we see data reflects that we do not see in the senior roles a representation of leadership. And what data supports is that when you don't have a pipeline of people in the senior roles, it is really difficult to create a pipeline of people continuing to flow in the senior roles if you don't have a bench, if you don't have people that are to raise people into those senior roles. Starting with interns, it's very hard to continually to push people up because it really does start with the leadership. So thinking of, yes, internships, but also fellowships and subject matter expertise. It takes years and years to just start with the internships. It should be, yes, internships and professional development and fellowships. So yes, internships, but you should think that and other things that will increase the pipeline at the top and the middle. So it should be both, really. It can't just start at the bottom thinking that an internship pipeline is going to increase the level of senior leaders who are going to be able to affect policy decisions and affect being able to grow and develop future leaders, because what we're seeing right now is the current leadership isn't there to develop those future leaders. It's really important to create people who can grow the leaders right now. And we don't have as many of those right now. And a lot of that leadership, and speaking currently, we've lost 4 cycles of leadership because of the pandemic and the situation we're in right now. So even the people we have in place, we have to think of.
I ran out of time. I'm sorry. I totally agree with you. It's an all of the above approach, and I'll do whatever I can to help. And Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll yield back.
You bet. Thank you. Next up, we have Ms. Williams, and then in the on deck circle, we have Mr. Latta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chair Tillman. I agree with you. This is it's not an either or approach. We have to make sure that we're focusing on both. So thank you for those questions, because we know that to build a diverse workforce on Capitol Hill, we need to be sure that our career opportunities are visible to talented people. And that includes people without DC connections. Some industries base their hiring around recruiting and even interviewing college students on campuses across the country. These industries bring some of the best and brightest into their fold before they even graduate. In Congress, we need to think about ways to broader cast our net for recruitment. Ms. Hendrix, your testimony referenced the Office of Diversity and Inclusion's partnership with colleges and universities. How can the House's resource offices leverage these partnerships to equip educational institutions with the information and resources they need to help their diverse graduates consider a career in Congress?
We've laid the groundwork, but we are one office. We're one office. So we are laying groundwork now. We are planting seeds. I think it is important to think of how we grow that outward. It can't just be us. So there are programs that are adjacent to ours, but we really want to make sure that we're developing long-term internship and fellowship programs that bring people here that provide both exposure and long-term experiences for people to transition into long-term employment in the Hill if we're going to create a long-term pipeline that is sustainable for increasing our pipeline for long-term growth and employment.
Thank you, Ms. Hendrix. Ms. Reed, in your testimony, you mentioned the need for Congress to recruit from a variety of schools, including HBCUs and community colleges. In what ways could congressional hiring be more transparent and accessible to ensure that diverse early career Hill applicants without DC connections feel confident navigating the process and putting forth a competitive candidacy?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for that question. I think we have to treat hiring like we do in other industries and handle it professionally. We have to hire recruiters whose job it is to go to college campuses and inform them about Hill opportunities. I certainly, when I was in college and high school, knew nothing about working in Congress. It was happenstance that I got here. But I think if we have staff who are focused on their sole job is to go and recruit talented from every corner of this country, I think that we can get a broader and more representative workforce. And that includes minority serving institutions, HBCUs, community colleges.
And Ms. Reed, maybe this is me as a new member trying to figure this all out, but each office hires their own staff. So I'm curious as to what that would look like for recruitment into individual offices.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the office that Kemba leads is a great conduit. Right now, what's happening is when you put out a listing, we take your listing and we try to amplify it. The Black Women's Congressional Alliance has a Google listserv, and we try to ping all of our networks. Kemba is in touch with candidates that she has done interviews with and trained them to interview for your office. I think if the recruiters were in her office and finding that talent, then we could suggest to you when you are hiring, give you a slate of qualified, prepared candidates who are diverse to enter in your office. So it takes the burden off of your chief, your LD, all of your hiring managers whose primary goal is to serve their constituents, and put some of the burden on Congress to help give you a diverse staff that you wouldn't otherwise get who are beyond the Beltway.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Meier, if we bolster our pipeline from diverse educational institutions across the country to Congress, how would that help ensure that congressional staff workforce represents the diversity of our districts?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. It's going to build the pipeline, and I believe, as Ms. Reed stated, many of us fell into these positions because we didn't know that they existed, that working for Congress was a thing. So awareness is really critical. If I might use a brief example, I worked in an office that did not have an HBCU in their state, but they were committed to having a representational workforce. So they created a specific intern program named after a civil rights leader from the home state, and then worked with the community to go out in turn and recruit diverse candidates to apply for the internship. Building that community connection, again, can broaden your outreach and build that pipeline. It's a first step, but that's why we've all addressed the multitude of issues and the overlaying. Once staff is here, do they see people who like them? Do they have supportive networks? These congressional staff associations are so important to provide the staff with a sense of welcoming and a place to go when they're struggling with professional issues or personal issues. Excuse me.
Ms. Meier, thank you for your comments. I'm going to have to follow up with you later because my time has expired and I do not want to get into another member's time for questions. Thank you.
Mr. Latta, let me ask you, I know Mr. Davis has to hop off in a minute. Do you mind letting him go ahead of you? Is that all right? Or do you have to jump too?
I think about that. I'll yield to my good friend, Rodney.
Go ahead, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Kilmer, and thank you, Mr. Latta, for giving me your 5 minutes and mine. So just go ahead and run the clock up to 10. Hey, Pearl Mutter, I'll take yours too. Hey, I really appreciate the group here, and I really appreciate the discussion. And I can tell you, as somebody who started as a staffer, this institution means a great deal to all of us. And we want to see the diversity in this institution continue to grow. I mean, when I started in 1997, nobody paid interns. Now we've got paid intern programs. We've got opportunities to bring people from every socioeconomic strata to Washington, D.C., and, to work in our district offices too. That's where I worked. And we wanted to make sure, and we still need to do a better job of in making sure diversity and inclusion matters at the district office level too. But I will tell you, as somebody who now has been here 8.5 years as a member, 16 years as a staffer, we've had a wide variety of very diverse employees in and out of our offices. And here's the good news. The good news is that some of our most diverse employees have gone on to better and brighter jobs because of the work that they were doing in our office and to such a high standard, they were able to move into something that they wanted to do beyond their current positions that we weren't able to fulfill within ours. I think that's a good sign. Here's my concern though. And Ms. Hendrix, ODI may have the statistics. What's the partisan breakdown of diversity? Because I think it's important for us as Republicans to realize that while it may be lower on our side, if you have those statistics, what can we do, in your opinion, to help encourage more conservative, Republican, diverse employees to come out here? And what can we do to work with your office to help make that better and make it more accessible for all folks who are interested in working for even our side too?
I appreciate the question, Mr. Davis. The data collection we have done is not broken down the data by party. In some ways that was intentional because it would have been harder to get people to agree to data collection because people believe that it would reflect on them negatively. We wanted to be able to collect the most robust information. We have not done it and divided by party, especially when you think of our offices are so small. And the information is collected anonymously. We have not even broken the information down by member, our member office. Our staffs are just so small, unlike the data that is collected by Senate offices, because Senate offices are much, much larger. Some of our offices, if you break it down by staff or individual staff, some staff have just a small staff of maybe 5 or 6 to 7 people, depending the time of the year that you take the data collection. So we have collected of the data as the House as a body rather than as an individual staff or of an individual member office. So we have not disaggregated it by party or by member office or by individual committee. So I would not be able to provide that information for you. I do apologize.
No worries. I mean, I can just tell you, just from our own perspective, the pool of applicants and diversity within those applicants has a lot less to do with race and more to do with gender and other issues. And that's a concern that I have. And I guess my question to anybody who wants to answer, what can we do to increase the applicants for internships, the applicants for jobs, the applicants of a more diverse nature that would want to come work for more conservative Republicans? Because we know, I mean, I'm only speaking from my experience in the hiring process. I know it's a little more difficult to get people to apply. And I want your suggestions on what we can do better.
And what I will do, taking liberty to speak on behalf of my deputy director, who I work very closely with, Mr. Castro, we do a lot of work with the College and University program and the Republican Resume Bank. They're working very hard and very diligently and are seeing a lot of success both in placements and both in intake through the Resume Bank, just in the same way that we have seen success in intake in our Resume Bank and in placements. And so I would say we don't see diversity as a one party issue. We are a bipartisan office. We're working not to seek increase in diversity by party. We are seeking to increase diversity for the House. So we are really working to work at this in a bipartisan and collaborative effort.
And I'm glad you are. I'm out of time. I appreciate that. That's all of our goals. But if there's a deficiency in applicants on one side, I would look forward to working with you and Mr. Castro to help fix that. So I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Latta. And thanks for nothing, Perlmutter.
Next up, because he was here at the gavel, we'll go to Mr. Latta, and then after him, Mr. Perlmutter.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair, and to our Vice Chair and to our witnesses today. Thanks very much for being with us today. Really informative. And, not to go back on some of the things that have already been discussed, but I think it's really important because, again, I've heard the term pipeline used several times by our witnesses this morning. And how do we, I know that we want to make sure that we're getting more people in these senior positions, but a lot of times we have to lay that groundwork. And I was privileged to serve in our legislature in Ohio for 11 years in the Senate and the House. And we have what we call the Legislative Service Commission in Ohio, which I think is probably one of the best in the state. We have a 13-month program where they accept about 40 students from around the country to really in-depth get to know every part of of Ohio and the way it operates in the government. And I was fortunate in the Senate they always have an LSE intern in my office. And it's such a great proving ground for them because after 13 months, and plus it's paid, that they were highly sought after, not only in the legislature, but across the country for what they were able to do, and also from all the different companies in Ohio because of the training that they received. And so before I start asking some questions, I want to lay that groundwork, but also with the universities and colleges. I know we've been talking about that. It was also asked by some of our members that, I know that Miami of Ohio, they have a program that, they have students that come here to Washington and then they place them in offices. And I think it's really important that we reach out across the country because in the state of Ohio, I'd always say, why am I only getting students from certain areas or certain colleges? And so we would literally just try to get as much information out because Ohio has a slew of colleges and universities. I think we're number 4 or 5 in the country with the number of schools that we have. But because I really want to make sure that we're bringing people in that want to have a certain talent. It wasn't always that they had a political science background or something like that. We had computer science majors and everybody else that participated in these programs. So I want to just kind of ask, and just going across with all of our witnesses today, what's like, Mr. Orton, if you could start, what's been the experience of going across the country to really reach out, to 50 states, the District of Columbia, going out there and trying to pull these students from these schools and telling them there is opportunity here in Washington. And we really want that, that knowledge of those students to come here. And then also maybe reaching out to the state legislatures across the country if they have some training programs that we could also utilize. So Mr. Orton, if you'd like to start.
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. And honestly, I think you've laid out a framework that the select committee really ought to think about. I mean, all of the places you just identified are certainly kind of areas where a more diverse and broad pool of applicants could be cultivated. But the reality is that the programs that actually do the work of finding students or prospective staffers seems to be fairly relegated to a couple organizations. And I guess for me, it'd be saying, can Congress change the game a little bit? Can you commit resources to actually build the kind of programming that you're talking about, either through ODI or elsewhere? I think all of us would agree that the universities, at least my experience has certainly been that there are plenty of students of different political affiliations that have interests, but they just simply don't know where to start when trying to sort of crack this code of gaining entry or an opportunity in Congress. And so my hope is that Congress itself would actually commit real resources to building the kind of programs that you're talking about.
Ms. Meier? Oh, I think you're on mute. There we go.
Okay, I apologize. Thank you.
No, that's fine.
Yes, I think everything you said is spot on. There are, in fact, a number of organizations, they're nonprofits, so they recruit both Democratic and Republican students, recent graduates and current students to come to DC for a period of time, and they focus on diversity, APACs in the Asian Pacific community, CHCI in Chile in the Latino community, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and they are always looking to expand and to build their connections with new offices. When I was in the diversity initiative, I worked hard to get them to build connections in Senate offices because they traditionally had placed their students only in House offices. But it was important to give them more opportunities to serve because it again builds that pathway for students who come early to see this as a viable career and hopefully get them hooked on public service. I am going to actually throw a bit of wrench in the conversation, and it addresses a couple of the other questions, and I'll do this very briefly. And that is, the traditional model has been to recruit students from internships and out of college. I mentioned human resources as an issue for members to be more familiar with, because understanding the trends of the future workforce is also important. Younger workers will be less likely to stay at a job for any long period of time. It's how they approach it. However, people are staying in the workforce for longer. So also looking at how you can draw diverse professionals who are farther along in their career. They don't have some of the basics you learn as an intern, but they're smart people. I've had numerous conversations with very successful professionals, people of color who said, I always wanted to work on DC. I never had the money to move as an intern. I wish I'd started. Is there a way to go back? So looking at diversity in this manner too can also increase the number of people you recruit and bring in really talented, diverse professionals to provide your service.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I know my time, I overran it, and I appreciate your indulgence, and I yield back.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm kind of looking at this in sections. So we've sort of got the employees of the House, so the staff employees, so staff committee employee, committee staff folks, but then my personal office. And I'm just, then there's new members and then members that have been here for a while. So for me, the way we've done it is I like to hire from my campaign, then I like to hire from within, and I like to, and folks come from my offices in Colorado to DC. And so in my three top staff, is my chief of staff, who's been with me since the beginning. She was my campaign manager. The other two top have been with me for the whole time as well, which makes it hard to accomplish the things, Ms. Hendrix, you want to accomplish. And so I'm curious how I think what I have is a good cycle. I've got longevity, which is one of the goals of this committee, is to have staff stability. Yet I'm not able to plug in, new faces, if you will, and new and additional diversity. It's all coming from my district. And so I don't know, I'm just sort of I feel a little perplexed by this. And I'd open it first to you, Ms. Hendrix, and then to the whole panel. I don't think I'm that unusual in how I do my hiring. So Ms. Hendrix, what do you suggest?
I think the beauty of the House is that there is so much variance, but the invariance, sometimes there is chaos. And so what I said is, what I would recommend is you have to think about, because at the top, there isn't going to be movement, you have to think about the future of your junior staff, because your senior staff are going to stay intact. So you have to think, your particular staff is going to have to think about the future of your junior staffers, where they have to go in the future. And so think about training options, think about how to keep them engaged, think about how to think about their future.
So, but here's my question to you.
Mm-hmm.
If my approach is to hire from the campaign to the district office, from the district office to Washington, I mean, maybe that's what I've got to change, because what I don't feel is a pool of applicants, if you will, in Colorado.
Interestingly enough, I grew up in Colorado, so that could be part of your opportunity. Look at organizations within Colorado to think about recruiting for your campaign and think about developing the diversity of your campaign staff. So it's not just in one place. You want to think about the diversity of all of those components. And really, it's about outcomes. On campaign, you're thinking about outcomes. How do you engage different communities to think about the outcome that you would like to yield in your election? And diversity is a component of that. And so diversity isn't for diversity's sake. you really want to think about what your outcomes are, and diverse teams do that. That's what we're really talking about here. We're not, diversity is about business outcomes, is about audience outcomes. And that's what diverse groups and teams do. They yield better outcomes. And so that's what your recruiting metrics should be about. And it's about skill sets, it's about opportunities, it's about creating the needs that you would, the needs and opportunities you would like to yield. And that's what we're really talking about. It's not a Noah's Ark opportunity for metrics or opportunities. We're really talking about diversity so that you can engage the people that you need to for the opportunities you would like to create for your constituents, for the opportunities you would like to create for the people that you're serving. And so you need all of the ideals and opinions and I'm missing a word here, but you need all of those things together in the soup to begin with.
And so for me, that would be internships locally for sure. And I liked Representative Williams' suggestion, and we've talked about it, of recruiting from college campuses. And it may be that I skip the campaign and go straight to the internships for the office, which we do a lot of that. I'll yield back. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Perlmutter. Next up, Mr. Cleaver. Oops, I'm sorry, Mr. Cleaver. We had you and then we lost you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You got it.
I'd like to thank you and Mr. Timmons for bringing this subject up because I think it's critically important, and it's something that we probably avoid too much with intentionality. So I think this is important, and I'd like and thank you for our panel. I think you guys are very smooth and clear with your comments. And so I want to find out if you think this works. Bill Clinton had a White House personnel director by the name of Bob Nash, who was from Little Rock, and I've known him for 30 years or maybe more. And he did something his first month in office after he appointed Bob. He went in and said to Bob in his office, and he said it in front of a lot of folk. He said, Bob, if anyone comes to me at all complaining about the lack of diversity, you're fired. And I mean, the people who are close in that administration will tell you that Bob Nash, who was a good guy, but I mean, Bob Nash was constantly dealing with issues of diversity. He'd call, somebody say, hey, your department's not looking good. You need to do something. You need to do it fast. So I'm wondering if you guys think that's too much pressure, or is that something that could work? In other words, we would, if members said to somebody, whoever that somebody is in their operation, hey, I want a diverse staff, and if I don't get it, I'm blaming you. Is that too tough? Or
Congressman,
okay.
Congressman, I'll take your question, or at least I'll start and turn over my colleague to try. I worked for some of your friends who challenged me pretty much that they expected that their staff be diverse. And I think as a chief of staff, what it meant was every single opening that my office had, and every internship, fellowship, any way our office could externally engage, I had to challenge. I knew that my bosses, the members, had a certain expectation that I had turned over every single rock. And so I think, we talked earlier about setting the tone starts at the top. So you as the member making that the expectation really sets the culture for the office and can drive the decision making for that chief and the rest of the staff. So it's a lot of pressure, but it certainly can make change.
Yeah, just to hop in on that as well. I would agree. I think maybe also would encourage you also, Congressman, it's good to see you too, sir, to set a time frame for your staff, right? I don't think this can happen necessarily in an immediate turnaround, but if you set goals, to Maria's point about a diversity plan and sort of map out what that can look like over the course of a Congress, over the course of however many years, that would provide some framework that I know that if I were a staffer with that sort of directive, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable with. And I'd also encourage all members of the select committee to think about how every member of Congress, there's good times to stand out and there are bad times to stand out. And I remember when everybody started bringing in Kindles and iPads, right? And eventually everybody had to have one. In fact, I remember Congressman Perlmutter and Congressman Cleaver talking to my former boss in the middle of hearings about this stuff. I think that kind of peer pressure works. I really do. And so I would encourage folks to think about that as well.
I'd like to answer, I'm sorry.
Somebody go ahead. Somebody saying.
With respect to hardworking chiefs of staff, accountability is what's going to yield results. But I would add to that layer, it's not just about hiring, but it is about the retention and the promotion. So the full life spectrum of the process.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I appreciate your answers. If you know anybody from the Clinton administration, ask them who is Bob Nash. I mean, everybody would know him. And if they got a phone call and they said, Mr. Nash is on the phone, they start trembling. And I mean, he is, but I mean, that's one way of doing it. But we're in a slightly different situation, in Congress. But nonetheless, we still have an issue. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back. 1 second I have left.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver. Next up, Mr. Phillips.
I had my audio on, not my video. Good morning, everybody. I joined a little bit late, so forgive me if I'm covering some ground that has been already, but I think it's fair to say that if we really want to expand the pipeline, we've got to paddle way further upstream than we do right now. I know there's been some conversation about accessing college students to introduce them to potential careers on the Hill, but can't we look at going a little further upstream? How can we engage high school students? How can we expose the work of Congress in ways perhaps that isn't being attempted yet, so we can expand the pool of diversity? And I would turn that question to anybody who might have some thoughts on it.
I'll go ahead and start, and thank you for the question. It is a holistic and comprehensive approach. And I tried to do this in my remarks, and I do this in my work, and I stress it is, again, not diversity for diversity's sake, but it is the work to build inclusion, which in turn is just going to yield a better product and help you in the work that you do. I cited an example of an office I worked in that created a community diversity civic leader task force that was able to reach out in ways that the office in DC couldn't. The district office had some relationships and were involved in the community, but they were extra sets of eyes and ears. So building those coalitions at the high school level to even introduce the concept is very critical. Again, you don't have to do any of this work yourself. There are organizations that bring high school students to DC. Building off of those and building those coalitions can help you take this to the next level of building inclusion. And again, I also recommend going the other direction, not just the younger entry-level staff, but people already in their careers who might be open to making a career change and bring really valuable work experience.
Anybody else want to share perspective on that? If not, if I might ask, which organization in your estimation is doing the best work in high schools that we might try to amplify and advocate for?
Congressman Phillips, I'll point to one example of my former boss, Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who has the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence project. It's in every elementary, middle, and high school in Florida. And it trains young men on all facets of civic education. And those are the types of programs that are integrated with programming, with their school programming, that you can get to a young person early, tell them that they can be a legislative assistant in Congress, inform them about internships and pipeline them. I think, to your earlier question, we have to fund it, we have to make it programming, and someone has to be in charge of and accountable for this work. And I think, we're innovative and smart enough to create that.
And that's called, I'm sorry, and her program's called 5,000.
It's called the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence Project. And I'm happy to follow up with your staff to give you.
Yes, would love to learn more about that. And just one follow-up question for all of you too. Congress is woefully ill-equipped to train not just staffers, but members of Congress. And as a member now, just in my second term, amongst my many surprises is how poorly prepared new members are for the work. How can Congress better offer boot camps, whether it be members as well, but for staff members and for those who might want to make a career change, or we don't have mechanisms to expose people to potential opportunities in other categories. Any thoughts on that? How we become a more intentional training institution?
I'll go ahead and start. And Congressman, in response briefly to your previous question, as soon as you asked it, I went blank, but I was going to recommend Close Up. That brings high school students, they're a very comprehensive program. Close Up, and I can provide that contact information to your staff. There are ones I know that also work hard on ensuring that they recruit a diverse body of students. I mentioned in earlier comments that I do support your committee's recommendation to enhance new member orientation. And I would say, even expand that to yearly caucus retreats that contain bringing in speakers, trainers, partnering with management organizations that bring in a component of HR issues that also address and help members understand the role of DEI. I know you have a lot on your plates, but building it into the system early on and annually can help that knowledge. I also recommended in a certification program, creating a management certification program for managers. In my written statement, I referenced the Civil Service SES for senior executive programs. They have a set of core competencies, and I think there are elements there to be drawn from in creating that certification program that can be offered over the course of one Congress, so no one is burdened by a week-long single training program.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you all, and please, any organizations doing great work, if you would, share those with us so that we can elevate and be better ambassadors. Thank you all very much.
Ms. Hendrix, I see you have more to say, and I want you to say it because I think we want to hear from you. Go ahead.
I have one organization. It's actually a Colorado organization. It's Youth Celebrate Diversity, and it trains. It started at Cherry Creek High School in Colorado, and it's about 14 years old. And they do workshops and training. I say it's because I went to Cherry Creek in high school, but it grew out of that. And they've been working for about 14 years, and they do workshops and training in Colorado for youth on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and social programs in Colorado.
And what's it called, Ms. Hendrix? I'm
Youth
sorry.
Celebrate Diversity.
Youth Celebrate Diversity. Okay. I love that. Yeah, thank you. I've made notes on all those. Any more you want to share? Just one little anecdote, if I can take a moment. I remember business day in my elementary school about as much as anything, having to create a little business and learn about revenue and expenses and come up with a marketing plan. But that notion for public service, how we might implant those, seeds at much younger ages, so people even know that, young kids know what's possible, and learn how to pass a bill and kind of ignite that potential interest at a younger age. I would love to work with all of you on that. And if you know organizations doing that already, please send them our way. With that, now that I'm about 10 minutes over time, I yield back.
I got to tell you, Dean, I think Business Day really nailed it with you. Well done. Well done, business day. We have a little bit of time for additional questions if our witnesses are open to that. I'll give members an opportunity to ask a second round if they have them. I had a couple I wanted to ask Ms. Austin Reed. I wanted to get a sense from you of what types of professional networking and training opportunities that groups like the Black Women's Congressional Alliance offer that the House doesn't.
Thank you so much for that question. What we try to focus on, Chairman, is market responsive trainings. So I hear from our members, we hear from our members about issues that are very unique to Black women. So as Kemba mentioned in her, or Ms. Hendrix mentioned in her testimony earlier, she hears from staff that they are stagnant in their offices. They have to leave to come back. That's anecdotal, but we see it in trying to fill roles constantly. And so we talk about how to, in your office, navigate the inner office politics. For people who are seeking to be a chief of staff, sometimes you don't have that. It's great that Congressman Perlmutter brought up the campaign experience. Sometimes to be a chief, you need that campaign experience, but that's not something the House can talk about. So we talk about how you get on a campaign and how you develop those skill sets. So we try to think through, we are not, and it's why we are a network and not an official staff association at the House. We try to think through all of the unique circumstances of a Black woman, whether that's negotiating your pay, being the only Black woman or person of color in your office. And I think if we could more tailor our trainings to the unique needs of diverse staff in an institution that has been historically white and male, I think you would start to more define trainings that are good for that network of staffers.
And Ms. Meier, do you have some suggestions for how managerial training can be impactful and long-lasting? You know, obviously, there's a broad set of training that would be valuable, but with limited resources being the reality, should we focus our efforts on immersive programs that offer certifications or on-demand training for when managers feel like they don't have the tool set that they need? Give us some guidance.
Thank you for that question, because it is critical. Again, the managers really set the tone for how the office is going to function and how you're going to attract and retain staff. And I believe the ultimate goal or goal to work towards is a longer certification program. Again, I cited in my remarks that federal service doesn't always provide all the answers that work on the Hill, but if you can build a program and then as staff enters it, then you've got that established way of approaching and getting managers up and running. But the here and now, I do think, again, there's enough work being done by management organizations, by other groups that focus on training, that can be partners for bringing them in and simply expanding the training options. That might be either allowing an extra day of vacation specifically for training, or expanding the budgets for offices to send their staff short term to start getting in, create a menu of the top 2 or 3 most critical issues that managers are facing. Too often, training can come in and be a punitive manner. And I really believe looking at management, at training that staff feels they're getting professional development out of, that they are enhancing themselves, then they are more likely to be willing to commit to that. I'll add from a personal note, I was involved last year in the first of its kind training program for staff through 501c3 that also offered executive level coaching. This is the kind of training you would get if you were in corporate America, but it is amazingly powerful to provide individuals that ability to build their own leadership development, because they're going to bring that strength to their roles and be stronger staff members for you. And I hope that there are mechanisms where we can both continue that and expand that as an option to staff.
That's very helpful. Let me ask if any of the other members who are on have additional questions. I've gotten texts from many of the committee saying they do not, but
I do.
go ahead, Mr. Perlmutter.
Yeah, now that I've gotten to a chairmanship of at least a subcommittee in financial services, and clearly we have staff that's been with the committee for a very long time. I mean, how, and to everybody, I mean, how as a member of the House do I encourage, like my chairs in science or rules or financial services or this committee, whatever, how do I encourage my chairs, to really be looking at a diverse staff, and where do they go? Do they go to Ms. Hendrix? I start with you, Mr. Orton, because you were kidding me about the iPad, so I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, when I was on the Hill, Ms. Meier had just started the Senate Diversity Initiative, and I think all of those sort of efforts had just started. So I'm amazed at sort of the progress. And I would say starting there makes a lot of sense to me. But I think an earlier point was made about sort of the rhetoric and the tone being set at the top by you. I can't stress how important that is. I think if staff understand that this is very much a real priority for the chairperson of a committee or a subcommittee, that carries a long way. I think, it's setting the culture of the committee or the staff as well, or an office. So I would say certainly ODI to the extent that I understand the work that they're doing, but I think we can't get around the fact that if we don't really put some muscle behind these efforts, investment in these efforts, there's only so much that these offices are going to be able to do. And so I think we do have to sort of take a full look at sort of how this works. But my hope is that we can continue to build out those offices.
Okay, thank you. I'm prepared to yield back. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
And Congressman, I just wanted to volunteer the Black Women's Congressional Alliance. We help committees and personal offices fill roles. So staff directors, LDs, chiefs can reach out to us and we can tap into our network of women to help fill your roles.
Thank
it's not
you.
A single, it's not a silver bullet, but we're ready to help.
Thank you.
Okay, any other members with a second round question? All righty, seeing none. With that, I'd like to thank our witnesses for their testimony today. I'm very grateful for your insights, and I found that very illuminating. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. I ask our witnesses to please respond as promptly as you are able. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. I also just want to thank our terrific staff for putting together such a terrific panel of witnesses. Very grateful for the work in pulling this together. And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.